So the curtain falls on Norwich City's 2022-23 season and also on Teemu Pukki's career in yellow and green. It was an emotional, angry, maybe even predictable day at Carrow Road on Bank Holiday Monday as Norwich City were beaten by Blackpool by 1-0 in their final fixture of the season. This is the latest edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, brought to you in association with Future Radio. As ever, I'm your host, Connor Southwell, and joining us to dissect that dismal final day, as well as maybe a little bit of a look to the future, is Sam Seaman to my left and Adam Harvey to my right. Gents, let's deal with the facts. I think what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the football. We're going to have a little chat about Pukki, and then we'll maybe look ahead to the future and what's going to come over the summer, which we all know is going to be quite a degree of change. Now the league table has formed, we can look at it factually. Norwich City have finished 13th. They finished in the bottom half of the Championship table. They've lost as many games as Rotherham, who, of course, until a couple of weeks ago were battling the drop. No wins at home in 5, 1 win in 11. There'll be a lot of Norwich fans, Sam, who are grateful to see the end of what has been a pretty wretched season.
Yeah, I think a lot of people surrounding Norwich City probably are quite relieved that that's the end of that, and quite excited for what comes next, because it has been an absolutely miserable season to be a Norwich fan, to watch the club on a regular basis. And I think the opportunity of a summer of change, which has been promised by obviously Stuart Webber and David Wagner, provides those fans with a chance at a refresh and hopefully some sort of semblance of difference in what they see when they turn up at Carrow Road towards the end of the summer. So yeah, I think it was a sort of game that every fan just wanted to be over, especially given they were probably all there just for that moment that came in the 82nd minute when Teemu Pukki was substituted and got the applause from the fans. I think there was probably a number of fans that, when 1-0 down to Blackpool, who were already relegated, going into the game, just wanted that moment to come, because we spoke to fans before the game. Anybody on social media would have seen, and probably most Norwich fans will feel themselves, that the main reason they were there on Monday was purely to pay tribute to a man that's given them 5 years of service. But there's been plenty of Teemu Pukki content out there, so I'm sure people are already excited and keen to hear about how things are going to change from now on. We know Stuart Webber's obviously going to speak to us and other media outlets on the 19th of May, so hopefully that's going to be mapped out and the plan is going to be given to fans as soon as possible, really. And given they've already shown Ashley Barnes and others around Colney, the signs of that rebuild are already happening. So yeah, I think it's appropriately forward-looking the way that the club is at the moment. But just to reflect for a moment on that terrible season, I think the extent to which everybody just wanted it to be over with really highlighted how poor it's been, and the fact they finished bottom half of the Championship. I don't think they can really argue with that. I think their performances this season have deserved that, and their performance against Blackpool deserved the 1-0 defeat that they took. So yeah, generally I'm quite pleased to have a little bit of a break from having to watch that Norwich team, and hopefully the next one I watch will look and feel quite a lot different.
Yeah, I mean, we went to the first game against Cardiff in July, which was a 1-0 defeat. So it's bookended nicely in that sense. But it kind of feels like, obviously we've been through a lot of games and everything, like lots of stuff has happened, but nothing's really happened at all is maybe the best way to sum it up, Adam. I mean, if we were to put or give this season a eulogy, or maybe something to encapsulate what it has been, if it had a gravestone, what would that gravestone read, do you think?
It would probably depict the hotel we stayed in Swindon, which was just very, very drab and just not memorable. There's nothing about this season really that sticks out to me. Maybe the win at Millwall or those kind of away games where maybe had a little bit to cling on to. It felt like maybe the page was starting to turn. And of course, it hasn't ended that way. 1 win in 11 is absolutely shocking for a club who had aspirations to win the league, of course, and that's not panned out that way. But especially top 6, I mean, to fail to reach that target feels like, those in the power have got to come out and obviously take, they've got to, well, I suppose face up to that. We're going to get that from Stuart Webber in a couple of weeks' time, and it's going to be interesting to see what he has to say about this situation. You know, I mean, effectively, it's been 2 seasons of failures, particularly in the transfer market. So something's got to change, and it's a big summer ahead for this football club. But yeah, in terms of this season, I mean, I think most fans will be glad to see the back of it, just refresh, and there's got to be some, big energy next season. From the start, it can't really be that Norwich City got off to a slow start again next season, because I think what's already been a very toxic end of this season could get a lot worse at the start of next season.
Yeah, and for me, I think the Premier League season was a failure, however you sum it up, the way that they packaged it, the way that they spent money, the way that they wasted money as well. But kind of the saving grace of that was, well, it was Manchester City, or it was Newcastle, or it was Man United, and it was clubs who, Norwich City can't compete with on any level financially in terms of the level of player. So even though it was a failure and you can't project it to be anything different, I think you can kind of accept it a little bit more. What you can't accept is this season the fact they finished 30 points, 29 points I think off Sheffield United, who finished second. 7 points off the playoffs. In reality, this season has kind of tracked, and we saw it even in the times that it was good. I'm using inverted commas, but when it was good and they won, 6 on the spin under Smith, they weren't playing well. Even when he was sacked and they were 5th, it felt like they were trending downwards. Even when David Wagner kind of got a tune out of them for a bit, that was another false dawn. So in the end, they've kind of ended up where it feels they've probably deserved this season. But that's the crux of the matter, isn't it, Sam? What I said there in terms of the expectation that was attached to it. The aim was to win the league. I had it throughout the whole, pretty much the first start, but basically until about February, March time, players will come out. We want to get automatic promotion. We want to win the league. They've just fallen so far short of that. And that is a lot harder to stomach this time around than it was 12 months ago, even though they got criticism then.
Yeah, I agree. And I think part of what's annoyed me almost about the season at Norwich is this mentality sometimes that, it can always get worse, or other clubs have got it worse and Norwich aren't in a particularly bad situation. It's all relative, and I think I said to you yesterday, if there was a club that was expecting to challenge for the title in the Premier League and they ended up finishing 13th. You look at the uproar there's been around Chelsea's season, for example. They're a club that wants to be competing for the sort of European spots in the Premier League and are, I think, mid-table in the Premier League. Norwich are in that situation, and yet because the Championship is like almost a jumble at times and characteristically unpredictable, it feels like Norwich have only just missed out on their goal somehow, especially because over the last few weeks and months, David Wagner's been speaking about the playoffs rather than automatic promotion. But they've fallen so far short. The last time they went up, they lost 6 games, I think, and they've lost, 18 this season, which is the same as Rotherham, as you said in your verdict yesterday. And that is just absolutely appalling. When you look at the level of the teams around them as well, it's not even a strong Championship that they're competing in. There are 3 good teams maybe, or 3 teams that probably Norwich have the right to finish below in that league, and yet they've managed to lose to 15 others. Very much also rounds in the Championship, and I think that underlines quite how short of their goal they've fallen. But it also comes from complacency and the fact that they had one of the worst Premier League seasons that any team's had, in my view. Park the number of points they had, they perhaps managed to grind out results at times. But for me, last season was way worse than the 2019-20 season, when they actually, after that relegation, they made quite a few more changes to their squad than they did this summer. So I don't think there was sufficient planning. I don't think there was the right attitude going into the season and the right understanding of how difficult it was going to be and quite how far off the top of the Championship Norwich were. And they just sort of sleepwalked into this position. How quickly did they shift from expecting automatic promotion to hoping for the playoffs, and then from that to finishing mid-table? I think it all was far too comfortable, and they were far too comfortable accepting their own failures this season, and that was and is probably the most disappointing part for me, looking at it from a Norwich City perspective. So yeah, I think it has been really one of the most disappointing seasons we've seen from this club in recent times, and picking themselves up from it is going to be really, really difficult. This isn't a 2017-18 scenario where they accepted that they weren't going to be promoted and they told fans it was going to be a season of change. This was one where they expected to be in the top two and they finished 13th. That is so poor. But as we've spoken about numerous times, and as I'm sure the club will be keen to message as much and as quickly as possible, they will now be looking to move things on and looking to make a change. And I hope that comes in the form of fresh faces and hunger and desire and a team that knows what it is, because Norwich fans haven't seen that for a long while. And I think that's what all football supporters deserve, to be honest.
This season can maybe be encapsulated, Adam, by looking at their results against the teams that have gone down. They took 2 points off Wigan. They drew both games. They took 3 off Blackpool, beating them obviously away, and then defeat at home. And they took 2 points off Reading. They're the 3 teams that have gone down this season. I mean, the fact, just to talk about yesterday as a football match a little bit, I know obviously there was an emphasis on trying to get Teemu Pukki a goal, which is actually how they conceded it. It was Gabriel Sara trying to play what would have been a Hollywood pass through to him, and then they get countered on and they concede, and that was the case. But you had, and I laugh, and I'm laughing maybe because the alternative is much worse, but you had this kind of situation in the second half where they were trying to get Teemu Pukki to score a goal, and yet he was the only one that was creating chances for himself. It was a pretty sad sight, really. But also, I mean, it's the fact that it's a team that got relegated pretty comfortably. They're going to be playing League One this year. They've had 4 head coaches, and they probably should have beaten Norwich by more than they did. It was a performance that maybe summed up where this group is and where it has been all season. It was, I feel like I've used the word embarrassing a lot this year, but it was at times. Structurally, it just completely non-existent all over the pitch, really.
Yeah, it's just the basics. I mean, some of the passing yesterday, it's like going out for straight out for a throw into Blackpool, and you just sort of put your head in your hands and think, how is this possible? I mean, there's sides in sort of, the non-leagues that can put a string of passes together better than what Norwich were doing yesterday. And of course, there's the mitigating factors of certain players are out injured, they lack leadership, they probably lack a defensive midfielder. Wingers, I think, are generally very
defenders, strikers.
Yeah. They're just poor across the pitch, and such a struggle watching it yesterday. I mean, if it wasn't for kind of the fact they were looking for Pukki, I think they'd have come in for even more criticism than what they got. It can't go on like that next season. There's got to be a much, tactically they've got to get it so much better. I mean, Wagner, I think, next season it'll be his squad a little bit more. I think the question marks around him and his tactics will certainly come under more scrutiny and under the microscope more than what they probably have.
What do you make of him so far? Because I think there is what I would describe as maybe an underlying narrative beginning to form, which maybe we expected when he was appointed, that if he starts doing badly, he's just going to be kind of chucked in with Stuart Webber because of their relationship and the fact they've worked with each other before, which I think is unfair of any individual, but certainly at the moment. I mean, what do you make of the criticism of him? Because it is such a poor run. Well, it was such a poor run. 1 win in 11, no goals at home in 5, which is basically, they've never done that outside of the top flight at Carrow Road before. I think they did it at maybe Newmarket Road or the Nest, one of them, about 100 years ago. I mean, it's such an awful record that they've managed to get. So what do you make of him? Because there are seemingly a lot of fans now beginning to talk about him and his position.
Oh yeah, I mean, any other club that you have a record of 1 win in 11, and I think your job's probably under threat, or if it's Watford, it's 1 in 2 games. But I think, when he came in, there felt like a real fresh energy. I think everyone was just sort of tired of the Dean Smith period. But I mean, you've now got to compare the two. I mean, Dean Smith's record was poor, but Wagner's record at the moment is worse, and I don't think the football's drastically improved. I think at the start, yes, the Preston game, the Coventry the game, we felt like we were seeing goals and, I don't know, sort of like attacking football, which we probably hadn't seen at all since Daniel Farke left. I know Dean Smith, is in the Premier League, but certainly in the Championship, we weren't really seeing a sort of brand of football that I associate with Norwich. Nice possession football, attacking football. But now I think you look at Wagner and his record, it's understandable the question mark's going to be there. I mean, Stuart Webber, I imagine, will be sort of fielding questions in a couple of weeks around the appointment of David Wagner and the way it's turned out so far. But I think he deserves a clean slate. You know, it's not directly his squad. It's probably not a squad that can press like he wants to press. You know, I think it took him a little while at Huddersfield to really get what he wanted. So I think he deserves a little bit of time. But it certainly feels like if Norwich don't kick on straight away at the start of next season, that I think these question marks that are currently amongst the fans are going to be really, really loud. And then, yeah, I think Stuart Webber and David Wagner will come under, you know, much more pressure than what they're currently under.
Which is exactly where we were 12 months ago, which is great fun. It is interesting on the David Wagner point, because I remember him coming in and he was asked a question about the squad and what he made of it, and his answer was essentially, well, if the club feel that this group of players can do what I want them to do, then that's that. You know, then I am happy in that to take the squad and try and do it. But it's become evidently clear that they're not really capable of doing what he wants them to do. And also, I would say what Norwich fans wanted to see from this shift of coach, because you're right, a lot of the criticism of Dean Smith was on identity and the lack of, and the fact that there wasn't a recognisable and nothing really to get behind, and that kind of struggle. But that's kind of the case with David Wagner, certainly over the last few weeks. And you can point to the injuries, and maybe that's fair, because they were, you're right, certainly when Kenny McLean was in the side, they had this recognisable, certainly when they built up, they'd have kind of a back three and they build up in a certain way. And you could kind of criticise how they did that, but they were at least doing that. I would say in the last few weeks that structure has been pretty much non-existent. And so, I mean, in my view, he will be the head coach next season. So I don't really feel like it's a relevant debate. But again, just on that point, Sam, to kind of look forward, the amount of pressure that it puts on the start of the season, and Norwich City starting the season well, and again, in and amongst mass change, or what we expect to be mass change to an extent, we'll come on to that later. It's clumsy, it's messy, isn't it? I think the way to kind of describe it, and yeah, I mean. Tactically, there are lots of fans asking questions about him, and as Adam said there, his record's not great. I'll ask you kind of a similar question. What do you make of him and the debate surrounding him at the moment?
Yeah, it's a very interesting one. Given the choice, wouldn't sack him now, but I also think he could and should have done quite a lot better. There is enough in that group for me, given what they've shown on occasion this season, to have got into the playoffs. It wasn't exactly the most high quality race for the playoffs that there's been, and there were certainly opportunities to get in there after they beat Millwall, obviously, and Blackburn. And if they had just been able to replicate those sorts of performances even twice more in those 11 games, they probably could have got into the playoffs. So I think Wagner probably has to take a good amount of the responsibility. He's not done a Sam Allardyce and come in for the last 4 games. He's had a real good chunk with these players to work on them with his principles, and not only is it about philosophy and getting them to play your style, this is also, being a coach is a game of getting the most out of your players, and for me, he hasn't got close to doing that so far. So as much as I would approach it with caution, and I wouldn't call for Wagner's head, certainly after the first few months, you mentioned that sort of cycle that they're now in, and the fact that we're in the same position we were in talking about Dean Smith 12 months ago, and Norwich can't afford, as I've written about, as you've spoken about before, to now have a situation where every season, in the middle of the season, they have a manager who has no accountability for how it ends, because that's just going to end up in a vicious cycle where they never really are happy with the person in charge, and they can never really work out whether they've got the correct person in charge in the summer. So I think a lot of it depends on Stuart Webber's messaging this summer, because he essentially now has 2 choices. He can try and alleviate some of the pressure on him and on the team right now by satisfying fans and telling them that things are going to be okay and that they're going to push hard next season, or he can probably take a bit more flack and say, look, it's a 2017 scenario again, and we didn't want to get here, but that's where we are, and give Wagner some patience. And if he doesn't qualify for the playoffs or he doesn't get promoted this season, it's not his fault, because we are in quite a hole and we need to work as hard as we can to get out of that, and that would alleviate some of the pressure long term. But as I said, I think for somebody under as much pressure as he has, who's got it wrong for 2 years, coming out and saying there's going to be another year of disappointment is quite a difficult task for him to come out and do. So there are 2 difficult choices for Webber to make, and I actually think what he says on the 19th of May has a huge bearing on how Wagner's time at Norwich will be judged. But for me, it probably is a case of give him time or sack him now, because that vicious cycle is one that many clubs have got themselves in the past, and it rarely ends well, with managers just trying as hard as they can to really establish themselves and learning in the middle of the season that they're not the person to do that. So I for now would say Wagner not necessarily is the right man, but should be given the chance next season to try and prove that.
Yeah, I concur. I think you can. Look, I think if you're David Wagner at the moment and you lost your job as a result of this run, and you were if you were at another club, I think that probably would be the case. I don't think you could have any complaints. By the same token, I think the last thing that Norwich City need, on top of everything else at this moment in time, is trying to get another head coach in. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he's the right one. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's not something they're going to have further down the line. But on top of everything else, they clearly feel that, and he clearly feels he has the answers to their problems. And I remember us talking in January, and I in particular, I can't remember what you guys said, but I'm sure you said similar things, felt like a very, very tough job. So I think you weigh it up and you probably say, on merit, I don't think he's quite shown enough at this moment in time. But by the same token, probably does deserve at least the summer and at least a pre-season to try and do it. But like I say, I think you and you said it there perfectly, really. You can get caught in a vicious cycle so easily, where you have a second half of a season where a coach just doesn't take responsibility for stuff. It just, I don't think that really works. But what I would add is, two head coaches have had a crack with this squad. Dean Smith and David Wagner have had successes before. They'll have successes after Norwich whenever they depart. Probably proves that the issues are a little bit deeper running than just the head coach, and it shows that you can't just chuck another coach into the equation with the same chess pieces and expect a different result, I think. So there's that element as well. I think he feels that they need change, so it's only fair for him to see that through, because then if it doesn't work, that's kind of on him, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where I am with him. Let's tie up the loose ends of this season then, Adam, by talking about Teemu Pukki before we do a lot of forward looking, which is kind of where I want us to head in this podcast, because I recognise the last few weeks have been very doom and gloom. Teemu Pukki, his send off, 210 appearances, 88 goals for the football club, fourth all time record scorer, behind of course Johnny Gavin, Terry Alcock and Ewan Roberts. Didn't bow out with a goal, didn't go quite the way he expected. There was this wonderful moment, I think it was in the second half, I think around about the hour mark, where Callum Connolly for Blackpool was receiving treatment, and the whole of the Barclay Snake Pit and obviously the rest of the ground as well decided to serenade him, and the camera we kind of, where we're sat, we're lucky enough to have access to replays and kind of live feeds of the games. And there was a shot of him, and it was zoomed in, and there was a redness around his eyes. The lip was quivering, and I noticed this actually in the mix zone afterwards when I was putting questions to him. I asked him about that moment in particular, and again the lips started to go, and he was welling up visibly. It was an emotional day for him, and I think, given the context of everything that we've spoken about and the fan frustration, actually I think the fans deserve a lot of credit for the way they approached it, because they did park. I mean, we saw it literally as soon as he walked off, but they did park all of the frustration and grievances they have with the club and maybe specific people at the club in order to give him the send-off that he deserves.
Yeah, I think from minute one yesterday, up until Pukki coming off the pitch, the fans were top class. He really got the send-off, of course, what the club done before the game with the sort of, the flags, obviously along come Norwich with the tifo, I think, and then obviously blasting out, "Don't you want me, baby," as well. I think everything was just absolutely perfect, probably until the end of the game. I mean, I sort of thought back yesterday about the Wes Hoolahan departure, and I mean, that was in a difficult season, but of course it was a season when Norwich messaged that, it was going to be a project, where this season, obviously, a lot of the fans, after probably Pukki left, started to depart Carrow Road, and obviously we, of course, had that... the players all lined up and Pukki came through, and there was no one in the stadium, which just felt a little bit sad. I remember, Wes Hoolahan got a similar treatment, but I think his was before the game, and of course got awarded with a shirt by Delia and Michael at that point. But that was probably the only twinge of sadness for me. It's just the way it's ended on such a bad season. And I actually thought Todd Cantwell summed it up perfectly in a video. He kind of said, people shouldn't underestimate the impact that Teemu Pukki's had, because I think in a season like this, maybe it's been a little bit lost. Of course, he's only got 11 goals in he's maybe not been the figurehead that he's been in previous seasons. But you look back to that first promotion season in the Championship, the second promotion season in the Championship, and of course what he's done in the Premier League. I mean, you just can't understate what a player he's been for this football club, and free transfer as well. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, that day when he signed, everyone of course was waiting for Ben Marshall, which is, you look back at those two players' careers in a Norwich City shirt and how different that's panned out. I think for me, he's probably the best player I've ever watched for Norwich City, certainly in terms of striker. I mean, him and Buendia between them, I think that's a difficult debate. There's been stars down the years, the Madisons of the world, and Grant Holt obviously is an absolute legend of the football club. But for me, in terms of just pure instinct in front of goal, I think Teemu Pukki is top of the lot. I mean, especially as well what he's done. I think for me, without him, Norwich City wouldn't have those two Championship titles. They might have been in the playoffs those seasons. They had other good players, but in terms of the goals he scored, and some of the really important ones as well. I mean, the two in the derby against Ipswich, of course, the goal at Villa Park. I mean, Ewan obviously sat down with him for the club, and we looked at some of the big goals in his Norwich City career, and some of those really stand out to me. And I think, particularly for like my age as well, it was sort of a period when I was going to away games with mates, and to me, he gave me some of the best moments I've had supporting Norwich. So I'll forever be, grateful for Teemu Pukki and Norwich City being a relationship, and sort of it's flourished in a way that has been quite beautiful.
Yeah, agreed. And there was a point, and I've only ever felt this with him, and maybe this is why I feel so strongly, certainly in my lifetime, that he's the best striker that Norwich have had in terms of quality. I think you can make an argument that Grant Holt had a bigger impact in terms of the way the club moved when it was at a low ebb, and obviously dragging it up the divisions, and he was kind of the poster boy for that. I think that's a valid argument. But in terms of quality, to score 11 goals in both of those Premier League campaigns in pretty poor teams, the fact he scored the goals that he has this season is relatively remarkable. That for me is why. But there was a stage maybe a couple of years ago now where he would run through on goal, and you could have looked away because you said, wow, that's a goal, they've scored here. Certainly behind closed doors that was the case, and for all the talk maybe about how brilliant Emi Buendia was brilliant, so you're right, people are right to make that, but Teemu Pukki made him more brilliant because the passes that he was putting through was leading to goals, and likewise the goals that he scored were because of Emi Buendia, so that relationship was quite something. And there was a moment actually after he left the pitch, I was kind of looking at it and I was thinking, goodness me, this is kind of what we're left with now, and that's not wholly positive. But yeah, Sam, I mean, final word on Teemu Pukki, because I'm aware he's been spoken about a lot this week, so I don't want to make this a Teemu Pukki podcast, which we could quite easily do and would be much more enjoyable probably. Give us your reflections on how he went off. I mean, that sight at the end, we've got just a paper in front of us here, and there's a picture of him after the players, which a lot of people won't have seen, so I will tell them what happened. The players gave him a guard of honour. It was pretty much in an empty stadium at that point, though. So maybe a tinge of sadness with how it's ended and how the season has ended. But for him, probably the day he would have wanted in terms of sentiment, would you say? Beyond, obviously, the result and whatnot.
Yeah, and I was really, really pleased that he managed to get that moment. I think the goal would have topped it off, and it was quite clear to everyone in the stadium, I think, how much not only him but his teammates, the crowd, were desperate for that goal to come, and unfortunately it didn't. But I felt personally that time that you spoke about when the Blackpool player was down injured and the Barkley were singing his name was probably the moment that every player wants when they leave a football club. And probably at that time he wasn't thinking about the last 2 years. Probably at that moment his mind was cast back, maybe even to his first season at Norwich, when that support was behind him and that connection was there and the team was there to support him as well, and it was just an unbelievable time. And I think, as Adam said, anyone that was a Norwich fan in that period has Teemu Pukki to thank for so many of those memories. And it's also easy to talk about the emotional side of it and what a legend he is and what a character he is and how impressive he's been as a person, but also as a footballer, just an incredibly intelligent player. It's not just about the fact that he was making Buendia's assists by finishing them. It was also the fact that those runs are rarely coming from any Championship striker. I don't think Buendia is looking up and seeing Dennis Srbeny making such clever darts between defenders and knowing the exact perfect time to find a yard in the box and finish that. And that's probably the issue that the strikers Pukki leaves behind face. Adamida, to me, and Josh Sargent both look like very physically strong, athletic players who can clearly hit a ball hard and can find the net when they're on form. But I really struggle to see those two players gaining just that knowledge, that almost inherent ability to find space in the box, and teaching that is really, really difficult, which is why I worry for Norwich next season. And I just think back to those times under Daniel Farke, because it's rare that a player and a manager suit each other so well, but he was the absolute perfect striker for exactly what Daniel Farke wanted to do, and there was no player that was as good in football at the time, I don't think, that would have been as good at finishing off those moves that Farke wanted his teams to create. So when I remember Teemu Pukki as a Norwich player, hopefully it's in the 2018-19 season, because that was when, for me, it really peaked. In the modern history of Norwich City, there hasn't been a team that's been as attractive, and it certainly wouldn't have been possible without Pukki. So yeah, I think Norwich fans will be really, really grateful for what he's given them, and what Wagner said in his pre-match press conference was true, that with time he'll only grow in terms of his legendary status. And to leave a club as the fourth top goal scorer, to get the reception he did, is what any player wants, and it's certainly what Teemu Pukki deserves at Norwich.
Yes, it's a shame that he wasn't given a performance that he deserved in terms of on the pitch. I think there was someone who works at Norwich told me a few years ago now about Daniel Farke and Teemu Pukki, that if they'd have had Harry Kane in their, obviously Harry Kane of present, not Harry Kane who was on loan at Norwich, if they'd have had him in their ranks, Daniel Farke would have still have gone with Teemu Pukki, because of how much he liked him and how well suited he was to his style of play. So I think that probably rings true to what you were saying there. And he is exceptionally modest, one of the most frustrating players to interview. I remember speaking to him at Blackburn after he scored his 50th Norwich City goal, and at various points where he's broken ridiculous landmarks along the way, or surpassed various legends. And you try and get him to speak about it and give himself a little bit of praise, and it would always be deflected elsewhere. He was frustrating in that regard, but it's a testament of the man, really, who's so modest, so family orientated, really quiet but not shy, just quiet and quite reserved. And there's not many strikers that you meet who are like that. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see where he ends up. But I think a lot of people are just kind of left feeling incredibly grateful and all the better, really, for having Teemu Pukki, having played for this football club for such a prolonged period of time. And he'll be sorely missed, I think, next season, which probably lends us on to speak about change and this summer. I'm really quite worried for Norwich City, and probably as worried as I've been in a long time about where they're at this moment in time. And I recognise that can feel quite like hyperbole, but I just feel at the moment where they're at is, so for me at the minute, I think they're showing every trait of a team that comes down from the Premier League and gets stuck in a bit of a rut, and that's what I'm concerned about at this moment in time. When I hear, and again, it's not a criticism of David Wagner, but when I hear people talk about the need for mentality, to me, just kind of means like older, experienced players, like 30-plus-year-olds. And I haven't watched this Norwich City team a lot this year and felt, oh yeah, what this team needs is a load more 30-year-olds. Like the core of it, Tim Krul, who's played a lot of games this season. I know he hasn't been number one in the second half of the season, but you know he's part of that group. Grant Hanley, Kenny McLean, Onel Hernandez, Teemu Pukki. Like they've got a considerable portion of players who are in that age bracket. And I'm not criticising players in that bracket because they can be extremely valuable, but I think it just feels to me a little bit synonymous of a club that is on a bit of a negative slide when you consider the recruitment, you know, a few years ago was so forward-looking and so different and so positive. I just fear for them, and I'm preempting a summer window, so hopefully at the end of the summer window I'm feeling a lot better about them and where they are. But the downward slide of it, the traits that they're showing, the words that people are using, I feel very concerned. But also the fact that what we've seen this season, so many disconnected sort of elements of the football club, to then have a situation where you manage to pull that all in the right direction, where, you know, we had the scenes at West Brom of, and again, it's optics of Andy Hughes speaking to the fans, and obviously chants for people to lose their jobs and for change. I haven't seen any examples / many examples of a football club that goes from that position to then having a summer window to then everything being okay again. And I just fear the way that they are, and this isn't me saying they're going to go down or anything like that, but I just fear chuck in another summer where they're going to churn a bit of the squad, that you end up kind of in a period where it needs a lot of time and it needs a lot of work. And I'm not sure that there's the patience or the willingness, because that belief in the people who are overseeing it just isn't there at the moment. Which is why when Stuart Webber comes out to speak on May the 19th, there's going to be such a prominence on it and such an emphasis on what he says exactly. But for me, it just, and I've used this word before, it just feels a little bit of a mess and a little bit broken, to the point where there's so much repair that needs to be done. I'm not sure they have the time or the willpower or the goodwill even to do what they need to do, if that makes sense. It feels to me now like we're entering a period of real stagnation, if not worse. And I think that's the fear for where I am. And obviously, hopefully, we see a summer window, excuse me, that injects optimism back into the place. Yeah, I don't know. Where are you at, Adam, really?
Yeah, for me, a lot of it is probably a lack of sort of churn in recent seasons. It feels like this squad's been together for 4 or 5 years now without really any major additions. Certainly sort of since like the 18-19 season, they had quite a churn of those players leave, and it feels like we've not really seen anything fresh since. The early signs of players they're being linked with don't really fill me with a lot of confidence, if I'm being honest. Personally, I'd like to see them almost go down the route where you kind of get players that you don't really know what you're going to expect, and if they turn out to be something really special, you know, almost what Burnley have done this season. I mean, no one would have heard of half the players they've brought in, and they've just been exciting to watch, almost a breath of fresh air. And I don't know, it almost feels like Norwich are kind of potentially going down the other route this summer, where they could end up in a situation where they could become the next Stoke of the Championship or the West Broms of the Championship, where maybe they've got a lot of experienced players that have been there, but there's not really that sort of, or those players that maybe get bums off seats and get fans excited, and they buy into sort of an exciting, youthful kind of squad with maybe that sort of little bit of experience around the sides, just to sort of drag them over the line in really big games where lots on the line. Yeah, I'm with you. This summer for me is quite big in terms of, 1, the players they bring in, 2, the fan feel around it, and then 3, obviously they've then got to kick on under Wagner straight away, and I'm not sure that this is a big enough summer to be able to do all of that and get it all completely spot on. And as we've already said, you know, I think if they don't start the season well, I mean, I think it's going to be a really interesting few weeks. It's a big few weeks in Norwich City's, well, sort of recent period of history. And yeah, I think certainly on the transfer front, I'm concerned with a lack of funds and potentially losing some of the bigger, better players maybe. I'm not sure there's much optimism for next season, and yeah, well, how that's going to leave this football club and where is probably a little bit unanswered at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it is that, as I said, they're kind of showing all at this moment in time, and of course they've got a summer window, I guess, to change it and to change the direction and feeling around it. But at the moment, it just feels like they're showing all the hallmarks of a club that comes down, loses its way a little bit. We see this all the time, cycles. Clubs get relegated, they go chasing promotion, they lose any kind of identity they have, they play over the odds for players, they can't shift players. It's a cycle that Norwich got stuck in before Stuart Webber came in before, and they kind of get stuck at this level. And that's kind of where it feels at the moment like it's heading, and this downward momentum, it really feels like that's hard to stem. And like you say, at the moment, it feels like Norwich fans are being asked to put a lot of faith into people who've kind of presided over this position being reached in the first place. And you look at what they've done in recent years, there are other clubs who have taken better footballing decisions than them, and I think this is the issue that I have with it. And I just don't think that there's that. So in 2017, if we compare with that, because that's the last time Norwich were in this situation, the reason they got through it was because there was fresh ideas, fresh voices. This time there isn't really any of that, and it doesn't feel like they're forward-looking. it doesn't feel like they're coming up with new solutions to the issues that exist. It feels like a sort of chain of events that I've seen happen before and that I've seen happen negatively. And look, maybe this is just me being very emotional and kind of attaching a lot of what we've seen in the latter part of the season, but especially kind of what they've done off the pitch as well, in terms of, and we could get into various strands around this, but I'm talking more specifically around the finances and the loans that they've taken out. Again, just sort of the things that they're doing, the decisions they're taking, the way that it's unfolded on the pitch. There's just a lot of alarm bells ringing, Sam, at this moment in time, and that's why this summer, as Adam says, feels really significant. But also they've got to kind of change this feeling and change, I suppose, this sense of momentum. They've got to try and swing the pendulum back into their favour, because at the moment there's probably not many people that believe that they can change the course of events to such an extent that next season ends with kind of champagne bottles popping and celebrations. It doesn't feel like that at the moment.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think the lack of change and freshness that came from David Wagner's arrival was a bit of a worry in that sense. I think probably the club recognised that there was a lot of negative momentum and that it was on a slide, and in order to introduce that feeling of a fresh idea and a fresh start and a new set of principles, they brought in a new head coach to try and give that sense of a reset. And maybe they had that for 2 weeks, but now we're straight back to where things were. I think had Dean Smith still been in the job, certainly in terms of the atmosphere around the place and the feeling around the football club and the team, and trying to arrest that and turn it around with mostly the same people involved behind the scenes will be very difficult. As you said, in 2017 it took a root and branch overhaul of the club with a number of new staff arriving in very high and important positions in the football club. So that's Stuart Webber's biggest task for me this summer, to actually make it feel like something fresh and something new. And that's probably why they need to make so many changes in the transfer market, and probably why the younger, fresher players and the hungrier players feel like the sort of players that Norwich fans want at the club right now. Because you look back at that sort of group, that 2018 group, and it was a number of players they'd never heard of, and probably no English football fan had really heard of, but had something to prove and had years left in their career to go and achieve things. And you don't see that with the likes of Ashley Barnes or maybe some of the other players that they might be targeting from those sorts of experienced championship ranks. So I feel the sort of experience approach you spoke about and the mentality focus there seems to be around where Norwich needs to improve at the moment probably is slightly misplaced if you want that overhaul, fresh start feeling. But I think Webber would probably argue there's also a need for pragmatism and evaluating where things have gone wrong and trying to address those problems. So it's striking that balance. But yeah, it's hard to see these fans getting behind a club that continues to go in the same direction for the next few months. So there certainly needs to be a feeling of change more than anything, which feels strange to say because people quite often are averse to change and people don't like it, especially in these parts at times, I think. So to be calling for that, there must really be something drastically wrong. And for the number of people that have asked for that overhaul and that change, I think there's definitely a recognition that things need to be reset and that the direction of travel needs to move. But quite how that gets achieved, we'll see. It's probably part of why Stuart Webber is coming out and doing that media, because he wants to give that plan and wants to assure fans that things will change. But it all comes down to actions, and we can use words as much as we like and we can talk about what Norwich need to do until we see some signings in the door and we see the atmosphere start to change and those within the club making that happen. It's hard to really be positive about, because there's so much work ahead in the summer, as David Wagner's spoken about, and they're yet to do any of it. So, well, I suppose they would argue they've started weeding players out, but in terms of who's going to come in and provide that fresh impetus, we're yet to know any concrete names. So I'm looking forward to seeing which of those players come into the door early, because that could well set the tone for how things look from now on.
I just remember 12 months ago, it was, Dean Smith would come out a lot and would talk about, we need more athleticism. And then they had a summer window to add athleticism and didn't. David Wagner came in January and spoke about the need for more energy. Now suddenly it's is shifted again to mentality. I'm just kind of worried about that, I guess, because it's an interesting cycle they've gone through. For example, I remember asking Dean Smith a question, certainly would have been in the first portion of the season, about leaders and whether he felt they had enough leaders, and he said they didn't. And again, but that he didn't necessarily feel that was their biggest issue. He felt it was athleticism and kind of their inability to respond to teams that press them and stuff like that. And you've got a manager here who's kind of made a career on counter pressing and being very energetic. And suddenly it doesn't really feel like that's where the conversation is at. And they've still got a core, and the base of their squad is quite young. I mean, you looked at the team you look at the team that finished that game on Monday, and I think Onel Hernandez was the oldest player by quite a considerable margin by the end. So maybe that is an argument that they need a few more of those kind of senior pros. And again, I don't want to preempt the summer window, because what's said publicly is often quite different to what actually happens. So we do want to, and I don't purely want to kind of make it sound like my worry comes purely from the recruitment either. I just feel the general trends of everything and the noises and the decisions that are being made feel like a club that kind of gets stuck. And I'm desperate to be. I really want this summer to be the one where I'm proven wrong, and I come out of it going, yeah, do you know what? There was a lot of worry at the start of the summer, but actually they've been able to do this, and they've done this, and they've done this, and all of those things have changed the page and changed the narrative. But it's a lot easier kind of said than done, and I think that's kind of where that worry sets in, because actually the amount of clubs who have been in this position who go on to actually regress further and things get worse before they get better, and it's a difficult cycle kind of every year that you don't get promoted. It becomes harder to do it again, and I don't know if that makes sense, Adam. I'm kind of thinking out loud a little bit, but that kind of explains where I am with it, I guess. I don't know what I want you to respond to with that, but if you've got anything to add.
I mean, just talking about kind of the levels of risk, I think. I mean, when Stuart Webber first came in, he went out into markets that Norwich have never explored before, brought in players that Norwich have never had before, influx of Germans that Norwich have never really had any German players in the history, and it was more low-level risk, but I think since obviously the Premier League failure and sort of the amount of spending and the risk that was maybe associated with bringing in the likes of a Jolis or Rashica, and the way that's failed, I think obviously there's then been, probably in Stuart Webber's head, it's more easier to then go out and say, right, we need some experienced Championship operators, and Ashley Barnes, he's been there and done it. But to me, going back to the point about David Wagner, I think you can get mentality and hunger out of players that are probably 6-7 years younger than Ashley Barnes, who will probably bring some excitement for future years. I mean, Norwich have had success in League One, League Two, those kind of players. Pilkington, Elliot Bennett, Grant Holt, Wes Houlihan, all players that were much younger when they arrived. They had a hunger, they had a desire, they wanted to get to the Premier League. It's new for them if they can get there, and they can try and prove themselves against the elite of English football and world football for that matter. For me, Ashley Barnes, with all due respect to him, decent Championship operator, but where's the hunger? I mean, has he really got any hunger to go, right, yep, I'm really excited to get Norwich back to the Premier League, and by the time we get back there, I'll be 34, 35, and probably considering, other options, maybe retirement sooner rather than later. So I just don't really get where the direction is. It feels like for me that Stuart Webber's got in a car and he's been like, I don't really know where I'm going to go now. Where before, probably back in 2017, it was like, right, this is the destination, this is where we're going to go. And, everyone in the football club just bought into this one, bubble, almost like a mantra. There's like, this is what we are, this is where we're going to go. And everyone was sort of, rowing in the same direction. To me now, it just feels like Wagner wants this, Webber maybe wants this, the fans want this. No one's really buying into anything. And that, for me, is where my concern for this summer and the future of this football club, certainly in the short term, lies. Because to me, it just feels like they could go down a route where they could end up with situation where, teams, Cardiff, loads of sides that have dropped out of the Premier League, they've maybe not really known what they are, and they've gone and bought lots of experienced Championship players, and then they've, go back to the point about regressed back to levels where maybe they were years and years and years ago. And I don't know. To me, that's where my biggest concern lies at the moment. That Norwich are going to end up in that kind of group of teams where they maybe just need fresh blood and someone with a fresh idea to come out and say, right, this is what we're going to be from now on, and everyone buys into it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think that's one of the things that when I talk about things being disconnected, that is the point. There's nothing that fans are really like. What are fans getting behind? That hasn't been, and maybe this is a comms point more than anything, but what they did so successfully in 18-19. This is how Daniel Farke's going to play. This is the way we're going to recruit. We're going to bring young players through. There you go. And Norwich fans went, yeah, okay, we'll buy into that then. And I think even if you said to them, and I'm not saying this is the case, but even if you said to them, we're going to bring Tony Pulis in, we're going to get a load of 6'5" players, and we're going to play 4-5-1 every week and hoof it long to some target man. You don't like it, but you know what they're going to do. And I think that's that. So that's that point. But also on the mentality point, I haven't watched. So attacking is probably a really good example. I haven't watched Norwich City over the last 5 Carrow Road games, sat back and gone, I'll tell you what they need here. If they had a bit of mentality, they might create a chance and score a goal. Like I'm just not thinking that. So, and you're right. Like you don't need 33-year-olds to come in and bring a mentality. You can get that from a 24-year-old. It's about character and personality that you recruit, and they may well do that. And they may also and look. Absolutely, is there a place for Ashley Barnes in this Norwich team? Absolutely. Is there a place for 4 or 5 Ashley Barneses and that profile of player in this Norwich City team? For me, no. But again, I don't want to preempt some recruitment that may look very different, but it's not just about recruitment. I think the wider situation and the other kind of aspects of this that make me slightly concerned. But that's just my view and my opinion. Lots of people, I'm sure, will be feeling optimistic and feeling positive for the summer ahead. And hopefully I will join them at some point. And like I say, maybe this is a hangover a little bit from the season. There are all various aspects, but that's just where I am at this moment in time. So, Sam, to end the pod, I mean, give us a bit of optimism, give us a bit of positivity heading into the summer. Why is Norwich City's 2023-24 campaign going to be so different to the one that we've just witnessed?
It's the worst question you've ever asked. Young players, some young players. Liam Gibbs won the Young Player of the Season and will likely be there. Yeah, that's exciting.
Ballymumba's coming back.
Ballymumba. Oh, Adam. There you go. I love Ballymumba.
He's been Norwich's Player of the Season.
Yes, by far. He's been way better than anybody currently at the club. I'm so glad Adam brought that up because I really, really like Ballymumba as a player. I think he's technically very, very good, and there's not been enough focus, not even close to enough focus on just being technically good in the last few years. There's been way, way too much cliche diving and looking for mentality and physicality and all this as answers for where things have gone wrong. And I think a lot of people have lost focus and let it slip on the fact that actually quite a lot of the time the best football team, and I've used Ballymumba now as a point to just get on my soapbox and complain about one of my main bugbears, but I think there's been too much forgetting about what actually wins football games and the value of
Sam Allardyce. Christ.
No, it's not. In fact, I would suggest I'm doing a sort of reverse.
You're going to have a podcast soon called No Tippy Tappy Football.
No, it's the opposite. This is what I mean. It's more like no mentality or something like that. That's going to be my podcast, because I feel like there's so much focus now on, or when things go wrong, there's so much focus, especially in English football, on mentality and physicality and
this is
the
kind of the point that I was trying to make.
And it's just so dull. Like, it's not all about the changing room. Sometimes the players that can kick the ball where they want to kick the ball are the best players and the players that you want in your team. And I'm not saying everyone has to be 5'4" and only capable of passing nicely. You need a team that has balance, but also not all of Norwich's problems are going to be addressed with physicality and experience. And
to be honest, like 12 months ago they said about athleticism. I'm still not sure they've got that.
No.
So like, if that's the case, and we come out of this summer and they've spoken about mentality, and it's like, oh well, hang on, we still haven't got athleticism, and we don't really have mentality. That's kind of the trend that I'm getting at. Really.
Yeah, no, exactly, but. At least there's...
Anyway, I told you to be optimistic.
It's Ballymumba. So Ballymumba. There you go.
Is that your answer?
Yeah. Sorry, Adam, but
yeah,
that is the best answer, so what are you going to do?
Anything else, guys? Anyone wants to wants to bring up?
An away trip to Plymouth. I've never been to Plymouth.
I've never been to Plymouth.
That's probably the most exciting thing on the...
It is, but can we set conditions around it in that we say if it is a midweek in December or something, that's not exciting. But if it's like the opening day at Plymouth, I'd be well up for that.
I think fish and chips down the front at Plymouth would be absolutely wonderful. I can imagine there's some nice hotels down that part of the world. So yeah, I'm quite excited for that one. I think that'll be a new ground for me. So that's probably one of the things I look out for is potential new grounds. I mean, there won't be any others, I don't think, next season. So that's probably the one I'm clinging to. Of course, the derby's back. I mean, whether that's a positive or a negative is a completely different argument. But if Norwich get the success that they've had in recent times, then that would be great. I'm probably not as confident as years gone by, but stranger things have happened. So yeah, I think probably Barley Mother's return is otherwise the one thing that's maybe I'm clinging to. I think he's loved down in Plymouth, so hopefully he can have a similar impact when he comes back here. I think we saw glimpses of it, of course, in patches during his actual spell at Norwich, when he was kind of getting little cameo appearances. I remember, I think I spoke about it a few weeks back. There was the ball across for the goal against Swansea a few years back behind closed doors, and I think from that moment on I thought there's definitely a player there that can grow and develop into one that could potentially earn Norwich City some money next season if they're still stuck in the Championship, down the tail end of the league. Then he could be an asset they could sell, and that's probably what I've got to cling to. So yeah, that's about it for optimism from me. I'm just looking forward to having a bit of a couple of weeks off, or a few weeks, or a month or so off actually, without any games, and maybe next season, we'll all get that sort of buzz at the start of the campaign when they're at Plymouth away that this is going to be our year and we're going back to the Premier League.
Yeah, and that's it. As the curtain falls, actually, it feels like actually it's the beginning of something, and it needs to be the beginning of something new. And that is going to be where, obviously, a lot of the kind of conversation and discourse is at across the summer. And we will, of course, have it all across our channels. I want to say thank you very much for listening to the PinkUn podcast throughout this season. I respect and understand they haven't been the most upbeat listen in the world, and we try our best to maybe try and put a balanced slant on things, but there are also points where you just have to say it as it is and share what your view of whatever that situation has been in time. And I like to think we've done that fairly, and we've tried not to kind of pull the wool over anyone's eyes as to the situation, and that's why I've kind of said what I've said today. So let's hope that this summer is a positive one for Norwich City. We'll try and keep the podcasts semi-regular, whether they'll be weekly or not, I don't know, but we'll certainly try and keep them as and when they're relevant, and as and when there's stuff to talk about. And I suspect there will be quite a bit to talk about throughout this summer, as well as obviously Norwich City embark on freshening the squad and freshening the club, I would even say, after what's been a season where it's felt pretty draining for everyone, I would say. So big summer concerned. We'll have you covered across the PinkUn channels. Of course, we've got the PinkUn Plus app as well. Do come and give us a look if you're yet to do so. You can get a free trial for that, and it's $2.99 thereafter. So give that a little look as well over the summer, because that's where all of our content will be based. But other than that, have a brilliant summer. Thank you very much for listening. Try and switch off and forget about football for a bit, even though I'm not sure how possible that will be given how the summer pans out, but it's going to be an interesting one. Thank you very much for listening to this pod and all season long, and we'll see you again very, very soon.